The sunlight hits the metal first, then the silence. Major Frank McCoy stands there on the tarmac at Clark Air Base, camera in hand, staring at something that shouldn't exist. Not like this. Not intact. Not abandoned. It's January 31st, 1945. The Philippines. And sitting before him, some kind of sleeping giant, is a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber. Tail number 763-12, gleaming under the tropical heat. No bullet holes. No shrapnel scars. No fire damage. Just waiting. McCoy's hands shake slightly as he raises the camera. He's seen plenty of Japanese aircraft before. Dozens, wreckage mostly. Twisted aluminum. Burnt frameworks. The kind of remains that tell you a plane died hard. But this one looks like it could fly tomorrow. He circles it slowly. 20 meters from nose to tail. Wings stretching 25 meters tip to tip. The nickname makes sense now, up close. It really does look like a massive cigar resting on 3 wheels. The engines are intact. 14-cylinder radials. 1,500 horsepower each. Still smell like oil and metal and possibility. This isn't salvage. This is a gift, and McCoy knows it. He climbs up through the wing inspection panels, flashlight cutting through the shadows inside. His breath catches. The fuel tanks are nothing. Just thin aluminum, maybe 2 millimeters thick, separating thousands of liters of high-octane fuel from the outside world. No rubber lining, no armor plating, no fire suppression foam, no protective coating of any kind. Nothing. He runs his hand along the metal, feeling the thinness of it, feeling how easily a single bullet could punch through, how quickly fuel would pour out, how fast fire would spread. McCoy's been commanding the Technical Air Intelligence Unit in the Southwest Pacific long enough to know what he's looking at. This isn't a design flaw. This is a choice. Someone, some engineer, some team, somewhere in Japan, decided this was acceptable, decided that protection didn't matter, decided that crew survival was negotiable. And now, 4 years into this war, McCoy is standing inside the evidence. He takes another photograph, then another. Documentation, proof. Because back home, in Washington, in intelligence briefings and engineering labs, people are going to need to see this. They're going to need to understand what the Japanese were willing to sacrifice for range, what they were willing to burn. The story starts earlier, 4 years earlier. December 8, 1941, Pearl Harbor still smoking when 82 G4M bombers lift off from bases on Formosa. Same aircraft, same design, same unprotected fuel tanks. Their target, Clark Field itself, the very ground McCoy is now standing on. They arrive just after noon. High altitude, 20,000 feet, beyond the reach of anti-aircraft fire, beyond the reach of anything the Americans have on the ground. Perfect formation, perfect timing, perfect execution. 636 bombs fall across the runways, the aircraft, the facilities, everything. Then the zeros come in low, treetop level, machine guns tearing apart anything that survived the bombing run. 17 B-17 flying fortresses on the ground, 12 destroyed outright, the rest damaged beyond flight. Nearly every P-40 Warhawk reduced to burning metal. 40-5 minutes. That's all it takes to eliminate American air power in the Philippines. Lieutenant James Harrington watches it happen from a bomb shelter. Watches the Japanese formation withdraw north. Perfect order. Untouched. Later, in his combat report, he'll write about the precision of it, the discipline, how they flew in beyond reach, struck with devastating accuracy, and departed without a scratch. The few American fighters that managed to get airborne arrived too late, find nothing but empty sky and burning wreckage. The Betty bombers had struck from bases for 160 miles away, a feat no American bomber could match. Not yet. 2 days later, the Betty proves it again. December 10, 1941, South China Sea. 20-6 G4M bombers join older Nell bombers in Attacking Force Z, a British naval task force built around 2 of the most powerful ships in the Royal Navy. HMS Prince of Wales, a battleship. 43,000 tons of steel and firepower. The newest generation of British naval might, HMS Repulse, a battlecruiser, modernized, armed to the teeth, both actively defending themselves, both maneuvering, both firing every anti-aircraft gun they have. The Betty bombers come in waves, coordinated, precise. They're carrying Type 91 aerial torpedoes, 840 kilograms each. Warheads designed specifically for shallow water operations, designed to run at depths that can strike ships, even in coastal waters. The attack begins just after noon. The first torpedo hits Prince of Wales amidships, then another, then another. The explosions rip massive holes below the waterline. Water pours in faster than damage control can manage. The battleship starts listing. Repulse takes 4 torpedoes while trying to evade. The ship's anti-aircraft fire brings down several Japanese planes, but it's not enough. Not nearly enough. Within 2 hours, both ships are gone. Prince of Wales capsizes at 13:20. Repulse follows 13 minutes later. 841 British sailors dead. The survivors are pulled from the water by destroyers, watching the oil slick spread where their ships used to be. For the first time in naval history, capital ships, actively defending themselves in open water, have been sunk purely by air power. No surface engagement, no submarine attack, just bombers. Japanese bombers. The G4M Betty has just rewritten the rules of naval warfare in 90 minutes. Through early 1942, the Betty seems unstoppable. It hits Darwin, Australia from bases 1,500 miles away, strikes Port Moresby across New Guinea's mountain ranges, attacks Guadalcanal from Rabaul, over 600 miles of ocean. The ranges, impossible, unmatched, a strategic advantage that Allied commanders can't counter. American fighters based forward don't have the fuel to intercept bombers departing from distant bases. Allied airfields come under attack from Japanese positions that are themselves beyond Allied striking range. It's asymmetric warfare, and for the first 6 months, the asymmetry favors Japan completely. The Betty participates in virtually every Japanese offensive operation: Philippines, Malaya, Dutch East Indies, New Guinea, Solomon Islands. Everywhere the Japanese advance, the Betty is there first, striking, burning, clearing the way. It becomes the symbol of Japanese air power, the reach, the effectiveness, the threat. But there's a condition, one critical condition, that makes all of this possible. Limited fighter opposition. When Betty formations can strike without interception, when they can approach targets at high altitude beyond anti-aircraft range, when they can deliver weapons and depart before fighters arrive, they're devastating. But by mid-1942, that condition starts to erode. American fighter strength increases. Wildcats give way to Hellcats and Corsairs. Pilot training improves. Tactical doctrine evolves. And Betty crews start reporting something disturbing. Losses. Catastrophic losses. August 8, 1942. The shift becomes undeniable. 23 G4M bombers depart Rabaul to attack American positions at Guadalcanal. Standard mission, standard formation, American. Fighters intercept over Tsavo Island. 18 of the 23 Betty bombers are shot down. Approximately 120 aviators dead. In one mission. The single worst G4M loss of the entire campaign, but not the last. The reports from surviving pilots are consistent, disturbing, unanimous. The Betty explodes with minimal hits. 2 or 3 rounds anywhere along the fuselage or wings produce catastrophic results. Fire blooms instantly, completely, fatally. The nicknames spread through American squadrons like wildfire: Flying Cigar, One Shot Lighter, Flying Zippo, all references to the same terrifying characteristic: the Betty's tendency to transform into a fireball from battle. Damage. By October 1942, when Lieutenant Commander John Thomas Blackburn arrives at Guadalcanal commanding VF-17 Flying F for you Corsairs. The Betty's reputation has transformed completely. First time we caught a Betty formation, Blackburn reports later. We couldn't believe how easy they went down. Hit them anywhere along the fuselage or wings, and they'd explode. His squadron actively hunts them, recognizes them as among the most vulnerable targets in Pacific skies. Easy meat, but why? What makes them so vulnerable? The first real answer comes in November 1942. Australian forces overrun Japanese airfields at Buna in Papua New Guinea. Among the abandoned aircraft are several Betty bombers, with varying levels of damage. Allied Technical Air Intelligence units conduct the first detailed examinations. They open the wing access panels, look inside, and find exactly what Major McCoy will find 3 years later at Clark Field. Nothing. No protection whatsoever. Thin aluminum construction. No rubber sealant layer. No protective coating. No fire suppression systems beyond basic extinguishers. Multiple Betty bombers examined at Buna show identical characteristics. This isn't battle damage. This isn't field modification. This is standard Japanese design. The implications stagger the engineers examining the aircraft. By 1942, every American bomber features self-sealing fuel tanks as standard. The B-17 Flying Fortress has had them since the B-17C model. The B-24 Liberator featured them from the XB-24B prototype. Even fighters like the P-38 and P-47 have protected fuel systems. Self-sealing technology works through layered rubber compounds that swell on contact with fuel. When punctured by bullets or shell fragments, the rubber expands, sealing the holes, preventing fuel loss, preventing fire. The technology adds substantial weight, but American military doctrine considers this weight penalty essential. Non-negotiable. Crew survival matters more than maximum range. Yet here's Japan's primary land-based bomber, produced in thousands, operating across the entire Pacific theater, with fuel tanks offering zero protection. The weight savings are immediately apparent, but so is the cost. The cost is written in loss statistics that mount with every engagement. The captured Betty at Clark Field in January 1945 provides the most complete technical analysis yet. Major McCoy and his team spend 3 weeks dismantling and documenting every system. Their report, classified secret and distributed to all Allied air forces, details specifications that explain both the Betty's extraordinary capabilities and its catastrophic vulnerabilities. Empty weight 6,741 kilograms, remarkably light for a bomber this size. Maximum takeoff weight 9,500 kilograms, fuel capacity 4,780 liters, distributed across 8 unprotected tanks, 4 in each wing, positioned in the wing's center section where they're most vulnerable to combat damage. Top speed 428 kilometers per hour, approximately 265 miles per hour. Maximum range 6,034 kilometers, over 3,700 miles. Service ceiling 8,500 meters. Crew complement 7. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, radio operator, 2 gunners. The fuel system design is particularly revealing. The 8 tanks are arranged in 4 groups of 2, positioned along the wing's longitudinal axis where the wing joins the fuselage. This placement maximizes fuel capacity by utilizing the thickest portion of the wing structure. Makes engineering sense, but it also positions the tanks directly in the path of enemy fire during combat. Any attack from the side or below will inevitably strike fuel tanks. The aluminum construction provides no protection. The absence of self-sealing compounds means even small punctures leak fuel continuously. American engineers calculate the weight saved by eliminating protection systems. Over 500 kilograms per aircraft. That weight savings translates directly into additional fuel capacity, extended range, but the cost in vulnerability is equally. CALCULABLE. Combat reports show Betty bombers hit anywhere in the wing area explode with near certainty. The unprotected tanks create what engineers call a critical failure point, a single system whose destruction guarantees loss of the entire aircraft. These numbers tell the story of design choices made years earlier. September 1937. The Japanese Navy issues requirements that will define the G4M's entire existence. Top speed 398 km per hour, cruising altitude 3,000 meters, range 4,722 kilometers unloaded, or 3,700 kilometers, carrying 800 kilograms of bombs or torpedoes. The requirements reflect Japanese naval strategy in the late 1930s. Japan's empire stretches across vast Pacific distances, naval bases separated by thousands of kilometers of ocean. The Navy needs bombers capable of striking enemy positions far beyond the range of carrier aircraft, bombers that can operate from land bases to support naval operations. Across the entire theater, existing bombers fall far short. The G3M Nell bomber has a maximum range of approximately 3,000 kilometers. American bombers like the B-17 have even more limited range in their early variants. No bomber in service anywhere in the world in 1937 can strike targets at the distances Japanese planners envision. The requirements aren't arbitrary. They're calculated based on distances Japanese forces will need to cover in any future Pacific conflict. Formosa to the Philippines, 460 miles. Rabaul to Guadalcanal, 600 miles. Japanese home islands to potential targets across the Pacific, thousands of miles. The bomber that meets these requirements will give Japan strategic reach no other nation possesses. But the requirements also reflect assumptions about future warfare, assumptions that will prove catastrophically wrong. Japanese planners assume surprise and initiative will provide protection for long-range bombers. They assume enemy fighter opposition will be limited by range and numbers. They assume the war will be decided quickly before enemy industrial capacity can generate overwhelming force. Every assumption will prove false. The man tasked with achieving the impossible is Kiro Honjo. He leads the Mitsubishi design team of taking over from Joji Hattori. Honjo studied bomber design at Junkers in Germany during the early 1930s, absorbed European aeronautical engineering principles before returning to Japan. He understands immediately that meeting the Navy's requirements will demand compromises Western air forces would never accept. Honjo assembles his team at Mitsubishi's Nagoya facilities. They analyze every aspect of bomber design, calculate weight budgets for every component and system. The mathematics are brutally simple. To achieve the required range, the aircraft needs massive fuel capacity. Each liter of aviation fuel weighs approximately 0.8 kilograms. 4,780 liters means approximately 3,800 kilograms of fuel weight at full load. To achieve the required speed with this fuel load, the aircraft needs minimal weight. Every kilogram added to empty weight reduces either range or payload capacity. These two requirements exist in direct opposition. Fuel is heavy. Protection systems are heavy. Armor plating to protect crew positions and vital systems, hundreds of kilograms. Self-sealing fuel tanks with rubber compounds and additional structure, substantial weight. Fire suppression systems, more weight. Redundant safety measures, more weight. The cumulative weight of adequate protection would prevent achieving the required performance. Honjo makes the decision that will define the G4M throughout its service life. Protection will be sacrificed for performance. The fuel tanks will be unprotected aluminum construction. No self-sealing compounds. No armor plating around fuel cells. No fire suppression systems beyond basic extinguishers. No redundant safety measures. Every kilogram saved will be invested in fuel capacity, range, speed. The decision isn't made lightly. Honjo understands the risks. His team calculates the vulnerabilities unprotected fuel tanks will create. They know combat damage to the wings will likely prove catastrophic, but they also know the Navy's requirements cannot be met any other way with available technology. The choice is between an aircraft that meets performance specifications with known vulnerabilities, or an aircraft that fails to meet requirements but offers better protection. The Navy demanded performance. Honjo delivers performance. The first G4M prototype flies on October 23, 1939. The aircraft meets every performance requirement the Navy specified. Speed exceeds expectations. Range surpasses projections. Payload capacity satisfies operational needs. The bomber enters production as the Navy Type 1 attack bomber. Mitsubishi builds the aircraft at plants in Nagoya. Initial production models, designated G4M Model 1, begin reaching operational units in April 19 for 1. By December 1941, approximately 180 G4Ms are in service with the Japanese Navy. These aircraft will form the backbone of Japanese land-based air power throughout the Pacific War. The Betty's combat debut at Clark Field and against Force Z demonstrates the wisdom of Honjo's design priorities under the specific conditions of early 1942, limited opposition, tactical surprise, operating beyond enemy fighter range. The Betty is devastatingly effective. Its range allows strikes from bases enemies consider safe. Its speed permits rapid penetration of target areas. Its payload delivers meaningful damage, but these advantages depend entirely on one assumption, that Betty formations will face minimal opposition. The moment American fighter strength increases, the moment interception becomes routine, the moment sustained combat becomes inevitable, every design choice that prioritized range over protection becomes a death sentence for crews. The Guadalcanal campaign exposes the fundamental flaw of Betty's design philosophy. August through October 1942, more than 100 G4M bombers lost with their crews. Sustained bloodletting Japanese air forces cannot sustain. The single mission on August 8 alone, 18 of 23 aircraft destroyed. Approximately 120 aviators killed. The pattern repeats with brutal consistency throughout the campaign. Betty formations depart Rabaul, fly 600 miles to Guadalcanal, engage American fighters, suffer catastrophic losses. August 9th, more losses. August 10th, more losses. By the end of August, the 4th Air Group has been effectively destroyed as an operational unit. September brings no respite. Betty formations continue striking American positions. American fighters continue destroying them in overwhelming numbers. The mathematics are inexorable. Japanese forces need to strike American positions to contest control of the island. Betty bombers provide the only means of delivering meaningful strike capability from Rabaul, but every mission results in losses that cannot be replaced. October sees the pattern continue. American fighter strength increases as more squadrons arrive at Henderson Field. Pilot quality improves as combat experience accumulates. Tactical doctrine evolves to exploit Betty vulnerabilities more effectively. Japanese losses accelerate even as the number of bombers available for missions declines. By November, when the Guadalcanal campaign effectively ends with Japanese withdrawal, Betty losses exceed 100 aircraft. Crew casualties approach 700 men dead. The exchange rate is unsustainable. Japan's most capable land-based bomber has been rendered obsolete by its own vulnerabilities, transformed from feared weapon into what American pilots call easy meat. Japanese planners expected losses. All military operations involve casualties, but the scale of Betty losses exceeds every projection. The unprotected fuel tanks that permit 6,000-kilometer range also guarantee that any hit to wings or fuselage will likely prove fatal. There's no middle ground, no wounded bombers limping home, no damaged but survivable aircraft. Betty bombers either return untouched or explode in flames. By mid-1943, Japanese engineers recognize modifications are essential, starting with the 663rd aircraft produced in March 1943. 30mm rubber, Sheets are installed beneath wing surfaces, where fuel tanks are located. These sheets aren't true self-sealing tanks, they're a compromise measure, adding minimal weight while providing limited protection against fuel leakage. The modification reduces top speed by 9 km per hour. Maximum range decreases by 315 km, but crew survival rates show no significant improvement. The rubber sheets can slow fuel leakage from small caliber hits. They cannot prevent fires from larger rounds or cannon shells, cannot stop explosions when tracers ignite fuel vapor. The fundamental vulnerability remains unchanged. Japanese designers attempt more comprehensive protection with the G4M Model 3 introduced in October 1944. This variant features actual self-sealing fuel tanks. Capacity reduced to 4,490 litres to accommodate the leak-blocking material. The modification reduces maximum range to 3,640 kilometers, a loss of more than 2,000 kilometers compared to the original G4M Model 1. Approximately 60 G4M Model 3 aircraft are produced by war's end. The modification comes to late and into limited numbers to affect the Betty's combat record. By late 1944, American air superiority is so complete that no level of fuel tank protection would permit Betty bombers to operate effectively. The war's outcome has already been determined. The Betty's vulnerability becomes so notorious that American forces begin using the aircraft in ways that highlight the dangers Japanese crews face. April 18, 1943. The Betty bomber becomes the instrument of Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's death in an engagement that demonstrates both American signals intelligence capabilities and the aircraft's fatal weaknesses. American codebreakers intercept Japanese communications, indicating Yamamoto will fly from Rabaul to Bougainville on April 18th. The Admiral will travel aboard a G4M bomber with fighter escorts. 18 P-38 Lightnings from the 339th Fighter Squadron are assigned to intercept, though only 16 actually fly the mission after mechanical issues ground to aircraft. The mission requires extraordinary precision, their deaths made nearly inevitable by the aircraft's fundamental vulnerabilities. The unprotected fuel tanks created conditions where survival depended entirely on avoiding combat damage. Once hit, Betty bombers rarely survived. Once on fire, they never survived. The crews understood these odds and flew anyway, because military discipline and cultural values demanded they accept the risks regardless of consequences. Surviving Betty crews were unanimous in their assessment. Former Flight Petty Officer Masaoto, who completed 28 combat missions before transfer to training duties, offered the most direct summary. The Betty was a magnificent aircraft that asked us to die for its range. We flew it because we were ordered to fly it. We died in it because that was what it was designed to make us do. The comparison with Allied bomber protection systems highlights the stark difference in design philosophy. The B-17 Flying Fortress featured armor plating protecting pilots and co-pilot seats, steel plates ranging from 0.3 to 0.31 inches thick, armored bulkheads protecting crew positions throughout the fuselage. The Bombardier position featured armored glass. Waist gunner positions included protective shields. Self-sealing fuel tanks were standard from the B-17C model onward. Introduced in 1941, the B-25 Mitchell rated similar comprehensive protection. Pilot and co-pilot seats featured armor backing. Fuel tanks included self-sealing compounds from early production. The B-25's empty weight of approximately 9,100 kilograms reflected the substantial weight penalty of protection systems, roughly 2,000 kilograms heavier than the Betty, despite similar size and role. The weight penalty for Allied protection systems was substantial and accepted as necessary. American studies during the war demonstrated the effectiveness of crew protection measures with statistical precision. Body armor reduced thoracic wound fatalities from 36% to 8%, a reduction of more than 75% in deaths from chest wounds self-sealing fuel tanks reduced fire-related casualties by similar margins. Aircraft equipped with protected fuel systems showed survival rates 3 to 4 times higher than unprotected aircraft when damaged in combat. Protected crew positions increased survival rates in damaged aircraft by providing shielding from shell fragments and small arms fire. Armored glass prevented pilot casualties from head-on attacks. Bulkheads compartmentalized the fuselage, preventing fire or damage in one section from spreading throughout the aircraft. The comprehensive approach to crew protection reflected American doctrine that trained crews represented assets more valuable than aircraft. Aircraft could be replaced more easily than experienced combat veterans. The weight cost for this protection exceeded 1,000 pounds in most American bombers, but American industrial capacity permitted this weight penalty without sacrificing production numbers. American factories produced over 12,000 B-17 bombers and nearly 10,000 B-24 Liberators during the war. The production capacity meant American forces could field large numbers of protected bombers without compromising capability. Japanese doctrine reached different conclusions. The Betty's design reflected a calculation that range and striking power outweighed crew survival. This philosophy assumed achieving surprise and maintaining initiative would provide sufficient protection. It assumed enemy opposition would remain limited. It assumed the war would be short and decisive. All these assumptions proved catastrophically wrong. By mid-1942, American fighter strength increased to levels that made Betty interception routine. By late 1942, American pilots had learned to exploit every Betty vulnerability. By 1943, Betty formations suffered such devastating losses that missions became suicide operations. By 1944, Betty bombers could barely operate in daylight against American opposition. The mathematics of the Betty's war were written in fire and loss. Every advantage that made the aircraft formidable in early 1940 became irrelevant once sustained combat began. Range meant nothing when bombers exploded before reaching targets. Speed meant nothing when fighters could intercept from distant bases. Payload meant nothing when formations were destroyed before weapon release. The examination of tail number 763-12 at Clark Field in January 1945 revealed the complete story. The unprotected fuel tanks that shocked Major McCoy weren't an oversight, weren't a temporary expedient, weren't a design failure. They were a deliberate choice. Engineers who believed range mattered more than survival. Japanese designers created exactly what their specifications demanded: an aircraft with extraordinary range and speed, built with minimal weight, optimized for the mission requirements they received. The tanks were unprotected because protection would have prevented achieving the required performance. The decision made perfect sense within the constraints of 1937 technology and 1937 assumptions about future warfare. But those assumptions collapsed under the reality of sustained combat against an opponent with unlimited industrial capacity and growing technological advantage. The Betty bomber became a symbol of Japanese willingness to accept catastrophic casualties in pursuit of tactical advantage. It became evidence of a military culture that valued mission accomplishment over crew survival. When American engineers examined the intact Betty at Clark Field, they weren't just analyzing an enemy aircraft, they were witnessing the physical manifestation of choices made years earlier. Choices that prioritized capability over survival. Choices that would cost thousands of Japanese aircrew their lives. The unprotected fuel tanks weren't an accident. They were a decision. The Betty bomber served from the first day of the Pacific War to the last. It sank capital ships and devastated air bases. It ranged across distances no other bomber could match, but its ultimate legacy is written in lost statistics that exceeded all projections. The aircraft that opened the war by destroying American air power at Clark Field ended the war, carrying Japan's surrender delegation in white-painted aircraft marked with green crosses. The crew of tail number 763-12 had abandoned their aircraft during the American advance on Clark Field. They survived by walking away from an aircraft whose design made survival in combat nearly impossible. Most Betty crews weren't so fortunate. They flew missions knowing the danger. They climbed into unprotected bombers and crossed vast Pacific distances, and they died in overwhelming numbers, consumed by fires the aircraft's design made inevitable. The Betty bomber's story is ultimately about the price of capability without protection. It demonstrates that performance alone cannot guarantee success when that performance is purchased at the cost of crew survival. The extraordinary range of 6,000 kilometers meant nothing when aircraft couldn't survive the final 100 kilometers to target. The impressive speed of 428 kilometers per hour provided no advantage when American fighters could intercept from distant bases with warning. From radar systems, the payload capacity of 1 ton became irrelevant when formations were destroyed before weapon release. Most importantly, the Betty reveals that military technology divorced from realistic assessment of combat conditions produces weapons that kill their own crews as efficiently as they strike enemy targets. The assumptions underlying the Betty's design, assumptions about limited opposition and short warfare duration, proved catastrophically wrong within months of the Pacific Wars. By the time these assumptions were proven false, thousands of Betty bombers were already in service or production. And Japanese industry lacked the capacity to replace them with better protected designs. Japanese designers understood the risks when they made their choices in 1937 and 1938. They calculated the weight penalties. They knew the vulnerabilities. They accepted the trade-offs because they believed the performance advantages would prove decisive. They were wrong, and thousands of men paid the price for that miscalculation with their lives. The Betty's legacy extends beyond aviation history into fundamental questions about aircraft design philosophy, military ethics, acceptable risk, the value of human life in warfare. American designers answered those questions by prioritizing protection, even at the cost of performance. Japanese designers answered differently. The Betty stands as evidence of what happens when capability is prioritized over survivability, when range is purchased with crew lives, when performance requirements override protection considerations. The thousands of burning Betty bombers across Pacific skies marked the consequences of that philosophical difference, revealing the fundamental difference between how different nations approached warfare in the Pacific. American forces designed aircraft to bring crews home. Japanese forces designed aircraft to reach targets regardless of course. In the end, the nation that valued crew survival built an air force that could sustain operations indefinitely. The nation that accepted catastrophic casualties for performance advantages built an air force that destroyed itself through attrition. The examination of tail number 76312 at Clark Field provided the final proof of what Allied forces had suspected for years. The Betty bomber wasn't poorly designed. It was brilliantly designed to achieve specific goals. Those goals simply didn't include bringing Japanese crews home alive. And in that single fact lies the entire story of why Japan lost the Pacific War. The sun sets on Clark Air Base. Major McCoy closes his notebook. The photographs are developed. The report will be written. The evidence documented. But standing there in the fading light, looking at this intact bomber with its fatal flaw built into every rivet and seam, he understands something deeper. This aircraft is a monument, not to engineering failure, but to the deadly mathematics of war. To the price of choices made in peacetime about battles yet to come. To the thousands of young men who climbed into flying Zippos, knowing what waited for them in the sky. The wind moves through the empty fuselage, through the unprotected wings where fuel once flowed. And the Betty sits silent, waiting, a ghost of a war that demanded everything and gave back only fire.